The First Sibyls and Oracles, Ancient Voices of Fate, Part 1. The Question Before the God. Before prophecy became a word for fortune-telling, it was often a place, a road climbing toward a sanctuary, a spring below a mountain, a tree whose leaves moved in the wind, a stone threshold where a messenger waited, not for entertainment, but for an answer that might change a city. In the ancient Mediterranean, people did not always imagine the future as a fixed line waiting to be read. They imagined it as something guarded by gods, hinted at in signs, and approached through ritual. An oracle was not simply a prediction machine. It was an institution where uncertainty became formal. A king could ask, a city could ask, a frightened household could ask. But the answer, when it came, still had to be interpreted by human beings. This episode is about those voices of fate, Delphi, Dodona, Didyma, the Sibyls, and the Roman books said to preserve prophetic verses. It is also about caution. The sources are uneven. Some are early, some are late, some are legendary, and many were written by people already looking back at old sanctuaries through memory, politics, poetry, and religion. There was no single ancient oracle system. There were many ways of asking, many local traditions, and many later stories about what the answers meant. Still, across these traditions, one pattern returns. When human communities reached the edge of what they knew, they often did not want a simple yes or no. They wanted a sanctioned way to proceed. The most famous of these places was Delphi. Delphi lies on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in a landscape that already seems arranged for sacred drama. Steep stone, a high view, a path upward, a sanctuary not hidden from the Greek world, but somehow set above it. In Greek tradition, this was the seat of Apollo's oracle. The priestess through whom the god spoke was called the Pythia. Cities, colonists, lawmakers, rulers, and private petitioners came to seek Apollo's counsel. The ancient stories make Delphi older than Apollo in a mythic sense. They speak of earlier powers of earth, of a serpent or dragon named Python, of Apollo arriving and taking possession of the site. Those stories are not archaeology in the modern sense. They are mythic explanations for why this place mattered, why it belonged to Apollo, and why the priestess carried a name connected to Pytho. The historical sanctuary was very real. It grew into one of the great pan-Hellenic centers of the Greek world. Treasuries lined the sacred way. Cities displayed dedications. Victories, anxieties, diplomacy, and rivalry all passed through the same sacred landscape. Delphi was not outside politics. It was one of the places where politics learned to speak in sacred language. The Pythia herself became the center of the institution. Later sources describe her as a woman chosen for the role, serving Apollo in a ritual setting. Traditions describe purification, offerings, laurel, the tripod, and the inner chamber. They also describe a voice that could be difficult, compressed, or ambiguous. That ambiguity is one of the reasons Delphi became so powerful in memory. A clear answer ends a story. An ambiguous answer keeps working inside history. One of the most famous patterns in stories about Delphi is the answer that is true, but not in the way the questioner expects. A ruler asks if he should attack. He is told that if he does, he will destroy a great empire. He assumes it means the enemy's empire. The destroyed empire is his own. Whether each anecdote happened exactly as told is often less important than the moral structure behind it. The oracle reveals not merely the future, but the danger of hearing only what one wants to hear. That is why the Delphic oracle belongs as much to literature and philosophy as to institutional history. Greek writers used Delphi to ask what knowledge is, what human beings can know, and what happens when desire disguises itself as certainty. The oracle did not remove responsibility, it intensified it. Modern retellings often ask whether the Pythia was intoxicated by vapors rising from the earth. There are ancient descriptions of trance-like speech, and modern geological studies have proposed possible gases associated with faults and springs. But a careful account should not reduce Delphi to a single chemical explanation. Ritual, expectation, architecture, priestly mediation, poetic tradition, and political need all mattered. Even if some physical condition contributed to the experience, it would not explain why whole cities accepted the answer as meaningful. The power of Delphi was not only in the moment of speech, it was in the network of trust around the speech. To consult an oracle was to admit uncertainty publicly. A colony might ask where to settle. A city might ask how to survive plague or famine. A ruler might seek divine approval for war. Yet the answer returned to the world of human action. People still had to choose routes, raise armies, change laws, perform rituals, or ignore the warning. Fate in these traditions does not feel like a chain locking human beings in place. It feels more like a dark room in which a voice offers a phrase and then leaves humans to live inside it. Delphi was the most famous. It was not alone. Part 2. Oaks, Tablets, and Other Voices. Far to the northwest in Epirus stood Dodona, another oracle with a different atmosphere. If Delphi is remembered through Apollo, Mountain Stone, and the Pythia's chamber, Dodona is remembered through Zeus, Dione, the sacred oak, and the sound of signs. Ancient authors treated Dodona as exceptionally old. Homeric poetry invokes Zeus of Dodona, wintry and remote. Herodotus preserves foundation legends involving Egyptian Thebes, Phoenicians, priestesses, and doves. These stories should not be read as straightforward records of origin. They are windows into how Greeks explained strangeness, antiquity, and sacred authority. At Dodona, the image is not first of a woman seated over a chasm, but of a tree. The sacred oak mattered. Later descriptions speak of the rustling of its leaves, of bronze objects, of priests or priestesses interpreting signs. Archaeology gives the site a different kind of voice. Thousands of lead tablets, many carrying questions from ordinary people. These tablets are precious because they shrink the distance between mythic oracle and lived religion. They show not only kings and cities, but individuals asking about marriage, children, theft, business, travel, illness, and household anxiety. This is one of the most important corrections an episode about oracles can make. Ancient divination was not only grand politics, it was everyday uncertainty. A person could ask whether to marry. A farmer could ask about livelihood. A family could ask which god had been offended. These were not always questions about the end of the world. They were questions about the next step. Dodona also shows how sacred authority can be local and material. The oak, the tablets, the sanctuary buildings, the later theatre, the cults of Zeus and Dione, these are not interchangeable with Delphi. They belong to a different landscape and a different ritual personality. To call them both oracles is useful, but only if we do not flatten them into the same scene. Across the Greek world there were many such places. Didyma, near Miletos on the coast of Ionia, was another great sanctuary of Apollo. Its monumental temple and oracle belonged to a world of cities, processions, priests, and regional prestige. It reminds us that Apollo's prophetic authority was not confined to Delphi. The god of music, disease, purification, archery, and sudden distance could also be a god of difficult speech. Then there were the Sibyls. The word Sibyl does not name one simple historical person. It gathers a set of traditions about inspired women whose speech was remembered as prophetic. Ancient writers located Sibyls in different places: Erythrae, Cumae, Delphi, the Hellespont, and elsewhere. Some Sibyls were attached to local landscapes, others became literary figures, voices from the edge of time. The Cumaean Sibyl became especially important in Roman memory. The famous story says that a Sibyl came to Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome, offering 9 books of prophecy for a high price. The king refused. She burned 3 and offered the remaining 6 for the same price. He refused again. She burned 3 more and offered the last 3, still for the same price. At last, warned by advisers, the king bought what remained. This is a legend, but it is a revealing one. Its meaning is not simply that Rome acquired magical books. It is that wisdom refused at the beginning may become more expensive later. It is that prophetic authority is not under the buyer's control. The king thinks he is bargaining. The Sibyl teaches him that some losses cannot be undone. The Sibylline Books of Rome were not private horoscopes. In Roman tradition, they were guarded by officials and consulted in times of public crisis: plague, prodigy, defeat, famine, disaster. The result was often not a specific prediction, but a ritual prescription. Bring in a cult, hold games, perform sacrifices, repair the relationship between city and gods. That is another key difference between ancient oracles and modern ideas of prophecy. The future was not always treated as information. It was treated as a relationship. If the gods were angry, the answer might not be, "This will happen." It might be, "Do this and restore order." Divination could diagnose a rupture. Ritual could answer it. The Sibyls also show how prophecy travels through culture. Greek prophetic women become Roman state memory. Roman Sibylline authority later becomes part of Christian interpretation, medieval art, Renaissance fresco, and modern imagination. Michelangelo's Sibyls in the Sistine Chapel, for example, are not evidence for archaic Greek ritual. They are evidence for the long afterlife of the Sibyl as a figure, ancient, female, inspired, foreign, and familiar at once. By the time we reach later reception, the Sibyl is no longer only a person who speaks, she is a symbol of antiquity itself speaking. That afterlife can be beautiful, but it can also confuse the evidence. Delphi, Dodona, Didyma, Cumae, and Rome each had their own histories. The Pythia was not simply a Sibyl. A Sibyl was not simply a Pythia. The Roman books were not the same as an utterance delivered at Delphi. The episode has to keep the threads near one another without tying them into one false knot. Part 3. Ambiguity, Authority, and the Memory of Fate. What did people want from an oracle? The easiest answer is, they wanted to know the future. But the evidence suggests something richer and stranger. They wanted permission to act. They wanted a way to frame risk. They wanted a divine witness to decisions that might otherwise be unbearable. Imagine a city facing famine. If leaders change the cult calendar on their own, they may be blamed. If they consult a sacred text and a ritual answer comes back, action becomes shared between humans and gods. Imagine colonists leaving home. An oracle's instruction does not build ships or choose harbors, but it gives the departure a story strong enough to survive fear. Imagine a king considering war. A prophetic phrase may encourage him, restrain him, or later condemn him for misunderstanding. The oracle is a machine for meaning, but not in the mechanical sense. It turns uncertainty into language. That language could be dangerous. Ambiguity protected the sanctity of the oracle, but it also placed enormous weight on interpretation. In the stories Greeks and Romans told about prophecy, the failure is often not that the god lies. The failure is that humans listen badly. They hear triumph where the words allow ruin. They hear confirmation where the answer is warning. They ask about victory and forget to ask what victory will cost. This is why oracle stories remain powerful even for people who do not share the ancient religious assumptions. They dramatize a permanent human problem. We search for certainty, but we carry our desires into every answer we receive. Oracles also raise questions about gender and authority. Many of the most famous prophetic voices in Greek and Roman memory are female. The Pythia, the Sibyls, priestesses at Dodona in some traditions. Yet the institutions around them were often controlled, recorded, interpreted, and preserved by male civic, priestly, or literary authorities. The woman's inspired voice could be central and constrained at the same time. She could be the mouth of a god, while others managed the sanctuary, selected the consultation, shaped the response, or wrote the story afterward. That tension should be handled carefully. It is not enough to romanticize the prophetess as pure independence, and not enough to erase her into the institution. The ancient material gives us both real ritual roles for women and social structures that mediated their authority. There is also the question of fraud. Modern audiences often ask whether oracles were sincere or manipulated. Sometimes political pressure surely mattered. Sanctuaries were wealthy, cities competed for influence, priests and officials were human, but reducing the entire tradition to fraud misses the deeper point. Institutions can be sincere and political at the same time. People can believe and maneuver at the same time. A sanctuary can be sacred to its worshippers and useful to states. In that overlap, oracles belong perfectly to mythic history. They are not pure myth, because the sites, inscriptions, dedications, tablets, and institutions were real. They are not simple history, because the surviving accounts are shaped by divine stories, literary motifs, and memory. They stand exactly where this series likes to stand, where ritual practice becomes legend and legend leaves material traces behind. By late antiquity, the old oracular world changed. Christian emperors, shifting religious loyalties, political transformations, and the decline of traditional sanctuary systems altered the landscape. Later stories imagined the last oracle falling silent. Whether silence came suddenly or slowly, the symbolic ending mattered. A world in which Apollo, Zeus, and the Sibyls could speak through public institutions gave way to new forms of sacred authority. But the longing did not end. People continued to seek signs. They read scriptures, dreams, omens, stars, lots, saints, visions, data, markets, algorithms, and expert predictions. The ancient oracle may seem remote, but the human posture before uncertainty is familiar. We still ask, what will happen? What should we do? Which warning is real? Which voice can be trusted? The old sanctuaries answer from a distance. No voice removes the burden of judgment. At Delphi, the gods' words had to be interpreted. At Dodona, a scratched question on lead still depended on a sign from leaves, priests, or tablets. At Rome, the Sibylline Books did not save the city automatically. They prescribed action. Even prophecy did not abolish responsibility. It gave responsibility a sacred frame. That may be the deepest legacy of the first Sibyls and oracles. They did not simply tell ancient people what fate had written. They taught them how to stand before the unknown, with fear, with ritual, with politics, with poetry, with hope, and with the dangerous belief that somewhere beyond ordinary speech an answer might be waiting. And perhaps that is why their voices still echo. Not because we know exactly what the apothecary said in every chamber, or what every rustling oak meant, or what verses were lost when the Sibyl burned her books. They echo because so much was never fully known. A mountain, a tree, a cave, a book guarded in a temple, a woman speaking words that others would spend centuries trying to understand. The ancient world did not leave us a single map of fate. It left us the memory of people asking. And in that memory, the oracle is still open.